Hi, this is Jonathan Rosenhead, Jerusalem psychotherapist. This week's Torah and Psychology post of Parshas Boy is titled Classical Conditioning of Tefillin. To discuss classical conditioning, we need to understand a few main concepts. Classical conditioning was developed or discovered by Pavlov with his experiments with his dogs, where he saw that you can condition learned behavior. And the main concepts are an unconditional stimulus, which can lead to an unconditional response. There's a neutral stimulus, there's a conditioned stimulus, which can then lead to a conditioned response. And there's the process of first order conditioning and also second order conditioning. So let's see how this works. In Pavlov's experiments, he took meat, which was an unconditioned stimulus, which led to an unconditional response in the dogs of salivation. Then there was a neutral stimulus of a bell, which led to no response. And then when he paired the meat and the bell together, he rang the bell and presented the meat. After several repetitions of this, it led to the bell becoming a conditioned stimulus in itself, that when the bell was rung by itself without the meat, it led to a conditioned response of salivation in the dogs. And this was first order conditioning. What can happen in second order conditioning as well is where you take the bell and you compare it with another neutral stimulus. So for example, a light. And when you pair the bell with the light, after several repetitions of this, the light in itself also becomes a conditioned stimulus that can also lead to the conditioned response of salivation in the dogs. So how does this process relate to Tefillin? So what we see in this week's Parsha, after the whole process of Yetzias Mitzrayim and all the miracles that Hashem performed for the Bnei Yisrael, the very last pasuk in this week's Parsha relates to Tefillin. That when we want to remember the Yetzias Mitzrayim, we want to remember the miracles that Hashem performed for us, the pasuk says that we should place on our arms a sign, la'os al yadecha, and also an ornament on our heads, l'totefos b'nei einecha. We know this is referring to Tefillin. So the question is, what is the psychology of Tefillin? How does Tefillin remind us of Yetzias Mitzrayim? The answer is found in classical conditioning. Because if we take the unconditional stimulus of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, talking about the miracles that Hashem performed for us, it leads to an unconditional response of appreciation and devotion and commitment and a relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And then if you take a neutral stimulus, which is the Tefillin ultimately are just boxes. They're just boxes which lead to no response. But then when you take the boxes and you place in them, within the Tefillin is the Parshas of Kriyas Shema, which relates to Yetzias Mitzrayim. And there's also with the wearing of Tefillin at the time of Tefillah. This pairing of Tefillin with Tefillah and with the Parshas of Kriyas Shema creates this conditioned stimulus, where the Tefillin in itself will lead to a conditioned response of closeness and commitment and appreciation of Kadosh Baruch Hu. And that comes through this connection with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, that we don't even need to talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim. We don't even need to remember the miracles that Hashem performed for us. Just by wearing the Tefillin in itself has become a conditioned stimulus to lead to this conditioned response of closeness to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. And that's why we can see, even with Chabad, where they're very makpid to try to encourage as many people to wear Tefillin every day, is that the mitzvah of Tefillin in itself has experienced a transformation. That it's become a conditioned stimulus in itself. That just by wearing Tefillin creates this connection, creates this relationship and appreciation and devotion to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. This is the conditioned response. This is the first order conditioning. The second order conditioning is that, as the pasuk says, we wear the Tefillin on our head and on our arms. And that means that it leads to a second order conditioning, this pairing of the Tefillin with our arms, which relates to our actions, and with our head, which relates to our thoughts. It means that every action that we do, every behavior and the way we behave in our life, and the way that we conduct ourselves, and also every thought that we have, the way that we think and process our experiences and process the way that we live, is related. It undergoes this process of second order conditioning that in itself it relates to, it produces this conditioned response of a connection with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, a commitment and a relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Every action that we do, every thought that we have is channeled and is focused on how we can build a stronger relationship and appreciation for what Hashem does for us. So we see through this process of the Tefillin that starts with Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, that starts with appreciation the miracles that Hashem did for us. It goes through this first order conditioning of Tefillin, and even second order conditioning of that, placing it on our arms and on our head, that every action and every thought that we have, even without talking about Yetzias Mitzrayim, produces this conditioned response of a commitment and a closeness to Kadosh Baruch Hu. Have a great Shabbos and keep well.